Hey guys, we are gonna start the webinar in just a couple of minutes to let in as many last minute people in as possible. So just sit tight and we'll be probably starting in about 2 minutes. All right, hey guys, thank you all for tuning into our webinar. My name is Angela and I'm the Director of Marketing at Hull. So this topic has been something we've wanted to do a webinar on for quite some time. So over the past year and actually more so recently, we've been getting a lot of inquiries and questions from people who are asking us specifically, hey, can Hull connect to my data warehouse? Can it connect to Postgres, BigQuery, Snowflake, etc.? And we were kind of curious about what the use case was behind those asks. And so after we did a little bit of digging, we learned that it was because people were really trying to execute on their product-led growth strategies. And they wanted to do this by specifically leveraging the product usage and behavioral data that had been stored in these data warehouses. So that inspired us to host this webinar with our good friend Wes at ProductLed and our awesome customer Chris Casey from Pusher. So yeah, we're really excited. Before we begin, if at any point you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them into the questions module. And if you want to direct your question at any speaker in particular, feel free to do that as well. We will be sharing the recording and the slides with everyone, hopefully within 24 hours. And so just keep a lookout for that in your inbox. So without further ado, if our speakers want to put on their video, we can get started. Jump right in.
Hey guys, I'm Tim Liu. I'm head of product here at Hull. Hull is a customer data platform that ingests data from a lot of different data sources in your tech stack and then allows you to segment it and synchronize it back out into different tools.
Hello everyone, my name is Wes Bush. So I am the author of this nice yellow book on product-led growth. And so my whole business, ProductLed, is really just helping people dissect and understand how to build a successful product-led business.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris Casey. I'm a solutions engineer at Pusher. Pusher is a real-time messaging platform. We provide a hosted WebSocket service called Channels, and we also provide a push notification service called Beams. We are typically used by companies in the media. We've got some big companies in ed tech and the gaming verticals, to name but a few.
All right, well, why don't we get started? So I think I'm going to give just a quick overview of what we're going to go through today. I think Wes is going to give an overview of what product-led growth is, why it's beneficial, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to use customer behavior data as a key part of your product-led growth strategy. And then I think we'll get into more some tactical details and how Pusher actually used it to not just for growth and acquisition, but also for retention and upsell as well. And then I think we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for questions, but I think we'll also stop shortly in between each section to go through some questions too as well.
Alrighty, so I'm gonna just start with getting everyone on the same page around what product-led growth is all about. So in the chat, I want to just hear who here feels like 100% they understand what product-led growth is all about. Just type yes if you have like a solid understanding of what product-led growth is. Then type no if you want me to really dig into what this whole strategy is all about, if you like more of an overview. So Laurel, you are on the page, understanding what product-led growth is. Anyone else want to jump in and really just say if you do or do not want to? No. Okay. In between. Right. So I'm getting a lot of let's jump in and just cover what product-led growth is. So sorry, Laurel and Richard, I'll make this quick so it's not too much of the same here. So product-led growth is really a whole go-to-market strategy where you use your product as not just the main acquisition method for your business, but it also helps you just not just lead with your product, but build a better relationship with your customer by starting with serving them first before you're selling. And so a lot of people, whenever we're thinking about product-led businesses, they don't quite think about does this just apply to software companies? And right now, most people are thinking quite yes, like product-led growth is really prevalent in the B2B SaaS space, but does it just apply to that space? And so there's 3 examples here I'm going to share with you. The first one is really just cologne. And then there's cars, and then there is shoes. Now, in each of these, what I want you to start thinking about is really just what do you typically do before buying these products? In each of these cases, what do you typically do? And I'd argue here that the product in each of these cases, the product actually does the majority of the selling. And this is really possible because what they're allowing you to do is simply just try before you buy. When you think of buying a car, for instance, instead of simply telling you how your new car will look and feel, they actually will give you the keys so you can take it out for a test drive and see for yourself. And instead of telling you how amazing you'll smell when it comes to perfume or cologne, they'll actually let you smell it and see for yourself how it will really work for yourself. And same thing goes whenever we're talking about trying on shoes. So at the shoe store, instead of describing how good this will look and feel on you, what does a good shoe person do? Shoe salesperson. They will help you try it on and see how it actually fits for your specific foot. And so the big conscious thing we need to take a look at here, regardless of what products we're selling, is that how you sell is just as important as what you sell. That is one of the core premises of product-led growth, is that we need to start looking at how we sell and really start evolving and disrupting the way we do that, because what you sell is easy to be a commodity. Especially in SaaS, people can create software easier than ever before. So it really comes down to that experience behind your product and how you make people feel whenever they're evaluating your product and how you're helping them. And so that's a little precursor to product-led growth, and just to get you thinking about so many different industries where this already, this strategy lives strong. But what's really driving the rising importance of product-led growth, I think, is really interesting. So there's 3 tidal waves here. And I'll touch on them a little bit, but I'd love to hear Tim and Chris and what your thoughts are around this as well. But one of the core pieces that's driving product-led growth and why you're hearing it again and again is the fact that technology is just deflationary in nature. It's always been that way. We're getting more and more technology, more advanced technology for less every single year. If you look back even just 20 years, 1 terabyte of hard drive space used to cost $1 million, whereas now it's less than $100. So you're just seeing this massive amount of pressure on companies to give more away for less whenever it comes to technology. And so what that really means is that customer willingness to pay for your product next year is actually going to be less than it was this year. And it's always going to go down. And so ProfitWell recently did a study on this. They found that over the last 5 years, customer willingness to pay for products has gone down 30% in just the last 5 years. But what's interesting about that first tidal wave when you compare it to the second tidal wave is the fact that, well, startups are more expensive to grow. And this sounds so counterintuitive because you're like, it's never been easier to create a SaaS business nowadays. Hacker Noon has this awesome study that basically shows you could realistically open up a SaaS company for $0 if you're a developer. And so it's just kind of interesting when you look at, well, the barrier to entry for SaaS no longer exists. But because of this, competition is growing significantly. And so for every single category, you are going up against so many different competitors. So what this basically means is the first tidal wave, you have lowering customer willingness to pay for your product as time goes on. And as time goes on, you have rising customer acquisition costs. And so if you don't pay attention to either of these tidal waves and adapt your business model, you will eventually run an unprofitable business. So that's why I'm always telling people, like, you really do need to think about building a product-led business, because if you don't pay attention to these tidal waves, they can disrupt your business. And the last piece, which really touches on just like understanding your customer data, is that your buyer has changed. Forrester recently did a study and found that 3 out of every 4 B2B buyers would rather self-educate than talk to a sales rep. And so what that basically means is previously, if you were a sales-led company, what was interesting is your sales reps could understand people's feedback, even just the way they're describing things, maybe rolling their eyes, they don't look that engaged. They were taking in so much customer data by just talking to people. Now, in a product-led world, this customer data is so important because you might not ever talk to these people, and they might be paying you thousands of dollars every single year as a business. So customer data has never been more important for product-led businesses, because you need to be tuning in and looking at what are those pieces of data and information that we need to pay attention to that will help us serve our users better. And so that's really what I'm interested in discussing with you further. And I know Tim and Chris are going to show you a ton of examples around just how you can get better at understanding your user through this customer data. And so that's kind of the main reasons why product-led growth is becoming a rising importance. But the other piece here, before I switch over to Tim, is why are companies going down this route of building a product-led business? And one of the main things and premises behind building a product-led business and why it's so important is, well, you can grow faster. A lot of these companies, whenever they make the switch to being product-led, is you can have a much wider top of funnel because you're attracting users who are interested in your product, but they're not quite at that decision stage of making that evaluation decision of going on and jumping on a demo request. A trial is much earlier in the customer journey than someone who's ready for that demo request. And so all of this really translates to less hand-holding allows you to be more capital efficient. And so because you're paying attention to your data and really understanding how people are using your products and how you can help them better, it does mean you can save a mountain of cash whenever it comes to reducing your customer acquisition costs. But I want to hear from both you, Tim and Chris, on like what are some other benefits you see around being product-led?
Thanks, Wes. That was actually really interesting. I hadn't heard your whole description before. I actually come from like a bit more of the sales-led enterprise growth in my background, so it's really interesting for me to use some of these new strategies and hear how a lot of our customers are using some of them. So just to start out, I think David and Daniel, you guys were asking some really interesting questions that I think we'll touch on. I think, I've been in data for a long time, and I do think that there's this sort of explosion of data, and there's a lot of data out there, and there's some really important points around figuring out, not just getting the data, but actually what does it mean for your business and your specific customer journey? I'd love to say there's an AI out there that's going to help you figure all that out.
Not yet.
I haven't seen it yet. I think your businesses and your markets the best. So I think we'll talk about some of the things that Pusher did specifically, in their business. And it's always interesting to me to hear kind of how you classify these different kind of key customer behaviors.
Hey guys, I actually think we could take David and Daniel's questions if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go for it.
All right. So David says, seems to be implying that product-led growth only makes sense in competitive markets. What if a market is not very competitive yet? It's a great question.
Yeah, awesome question, David. So I do have a framework where it's like going through specifically if it makes sense for you to be product-led now or not. I will put the link after I answer this in the chat if you want to go into it further, but I'll give you the TLDR here. So most cases, if your market is like, let's say, absolutely brand new, in a lot of cases, it might not actually make sense for you to be product-led right away because you want to understand your users. And one of the best ways to do that is actually talking to them. And when you go completely self-serve, you do lose out on a lot of that data and understanding your customers. Once you have a repeatable model, you've seen how you can help people. One of the best ways to scale that up is becoming product-led. So that is how I would go about it. If you are just like pre-product market fit, trying to understand where you are, how you stand as a business, you might want to actually continue being sales-led for now, just to understand your customers better. But then eventually, you'll definitely want to switch sooner than later and become more product-led, because as you mentioned, all markets do become more and more competitive as time goes on. And if you want to really build that market-leading position in the market, it does make a ton of sense. Daniel, okay, so much big data to tell us what, lacking tools to help us discover why. Yes, I 100% agree with you. There's a ton of tools out there that just give you a mountain of data, but that's why I do believe there is, not to shake the boat too much, but there has to be a new rule around just understanding product data alone. I know there's Pendo preaching like product ops. I don't know if it's that or something else, but there is going to have to be more people understanding this data, because we're just creating too much of it. And it's not necessarily that it's too much. It's just the noise to signal ratio can be very high.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that a little bit. I mean, we have customers that I wouldn't say are necessarily product-led, but still this data, this customer behavior data, allows you to do so many things. I think initially probably it lived in sort of a product management function where you're trying to understand how your users are using your product. But I think it's grown into so many other functions where people are using product data to, qualify sales leads, to do all of these things to help your sales and marketing funnel that I wouldn't necessarily put in a product-led category, but I still think it sort of underlines the power in kind of understanding your customer's behavior and using that to determine better their intent and their propensity to buy. But we'll get into that in a second. So yeah, just stepping back for a second, and as we're talking about, the focus of this webinar is particularly around customer behavior data, which we think is one of the most important parts of a product-led growth strategy. Just a couple quick numbers. McKinsey Company were saying that companies that leverage this type of customer behavior data outperform their peers by 85% in sales growth and 25% in gross margin. So we know some people, it's working for some people for sure. And so I think we'll talk a little bit more, about what customer behavior data is, and the way that you can use it across your entire company. So I think stepping back a second, one of the pioneers, that I would think in a product-led strategy is Netflix. They did a lot of things to study your behavior, to determine what to recommend to you, but also things, like their shows. House of Cards, for instance, they said, okay, well, people love political thrillers, they love to binge watch, and a lot of people like Kevin Spacey. Why don't we just put that all together and see what happens? The VP of Product of Innovation at Netflix says, it doesn't really matter if you're a 60-year-old woman or a 20-year-old man, because a 20-year-old man can watch Say Yes to the Dress, and 60-year-old woman could be watching Hellboy. So I think what this is really telling us is that, customer behavior data is really telling us something very deep about what our customers are doing, more than, and I like the analogy that Wes drew with the salesperson in the room with the prospect, where he is processing all of this data on his customer as he talks to them, as he sees their body language. What if you don't have that touch point, or what if that touch point, you can't get to that in a scalable way? The only other way is to kind of determine what your prospect is doing, and that could be in your product itself, if you've got a freemium tier, or that could be just browsing your website even. And so what I think this behavior data really is starting to tell you is what is their propensity to buy. It's telling you a little bit more about their intent, and I'll say a little bit about some of the traditional ways to tell this. A lot of marketers are pretty familiar with using firmographic, demographic data, but you marry that with what they're actually doing and what they're actually interested in doing kind of as they go around your website or as they're in your product, it becomes a pretty powerful way to target and qualify. And I'll just say, I found my son watching this show on Netflix the other day. He loves dinosaur shows and he loves truck shows. He was watching this show called Dino Trucks the other day. So that just shows how much, they're using that data to really make it an enjoyable experience for what you're watching on Netflix. So what is customer behavior data? So I think it can be a few different things. Ultimately, it's how your customer is interacting with you, your product, and your brand. I would even put things in like, what are they clicking on your website? How are they interacting with your salespeople? There's a lot of things I would put under the umbrella of customer behavior data. But I think there is one important point to call out. I think we referenced it a little bit earlier. You can track clicks and you can track all the pages that they go to. But I do think that depending on your business, there's some really important there are really important events and things that customers do that are worth tracking a little bit more, worth kind of aggregating up to. And then once you can find those kind of key moments in your customer's buying journey, your behavior data becomes much more easy to kind of activate and do things based off of that data, rather than maybe just tracking clicks. So these were actually a few examples that Chris has in their implementation over at Pusher that I thought were really interesting. They don't apply to everybody, but I thought they applied to Pusher pretty well. I'm always kind of interested to hear how people come up with these key moments for their business. Chris, could you speak to a couple of these kind of key events for your customers a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So we want to identify events that we thought were kind of going to be really important in the customer journey, and you've already kind of touched on some of the reasons for this. So as an example, page views, we were looking at the page view event in Hull, but looking at page views that are really relevant to the customer journey. So did they view a tutorial page? Did they view the getting started guide? Things like that. It's hooks into actually using our product and demonstrating that they are moving forward in the right direction. And then things like have they created an app? That's a trigger for them moving forwards in their kind of customer journey and things like that. And then like looking at usage data and really hooking into events that mean the customer's like really doing something with our product. And that's kind of what the metrics we want to pick out to give us the most insight into their behavior.
Cool, thanks. So, okay, so I think this is the last point I'll touch on, just, on a little bit more tactical side of things. Where is customer behavior data stored? And I think the answer to that, there's several answers to that. It could just be, as people click on your website, you're passing this data to a tool like Hull, and you're interacting directly. You're interacting directly with the tool that you're going to be storing your customer data in. But a lot of the times, engineers will architect your system so that they're storing this customer behavior data, and they don't even really know the value. They're kind of doing it for audit purposes, or making sure that you're that they have a history of what people are doing. And so what we find a lot of the time is that you've already got a database back there that the engineers have built that has a lot of this customer data in there. And that in addition, warehouses, for example, things like BigQuery, Snowflake, Redshift, they're the perfect place for customer data, because they're meant to hold really large amounts of data as click streams can become. So we find that a lot of the time the data resides there as well. But no matter where it is, as a part of the whole product, we build connectors into all of those places that where the data could potentially be, in order to get it in and get some visibility on that data and actually operationalize that data.
Hey, we had a question from Marilyn. Do you think we want to save that for later and take that now?
Yeah, sorry, I was just reading the question. Yeah, I think, if you have a sales gated process where people don't touch your product until they've, paid you a bunch of money, yeah, I think behavior data could be pretty limited. In those cases, there's a lot of the things that we track are sort of top of the funnel things. Did they open an email? Did they go to your site after they went to your email? Did they click on one of your retargeting campaigns? It's, sort of the whole scope of, how is your customer interacting with your brand, before they're your customer. So I think there's a lot of value there too. I think we're probably going to primarily focus on sort of product-led growth. Right. Yeah. Correct. Yeah, so just to give you kind of an overview of where, the next couple sections of what we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about first, how product-led data, within the product can help you increase your growth and acquisition, but also how you can use that product data for customer retention, upsell. And I think for a B2B case, retention and upsell, particularly if you don't have a trial or something like that, is probably more where you would be using, customer behavior data. What are they doing? How much are they using your product? Are they at risk? And that kind of gets into the whole area of, engagement scoring and things like health scores, things like that, which I think we'll briefly touch on.
So just to sort of like jump into to start giving you an example of how we use product-led data here at Pusher. The challenge that we kind of faced was we have a freemium or a free forever kind of plan, so customers can come to our site, they can sign up, they can get going, and they can move along on our free plan. This is pretty generous, so like customers may just be on the free plan forever, especially if they're at like a small scale. And this means while it's relatively easy for us to acquire customers, it's actually difficult for us to kind of sort through all of the leads that this may generate. Like, how do you know if they're like a good quality sign up or not? Are they just going to be someone doing a hobby project, or are these customers that are actually going to grow into like some of our bigger plans? And we were really struggling with kind of an effective way to identify customers with that potential to convert to our paying plans, and so we could engage them effectively through our customer success team. So that was kind of the challenge for us, and like what we saw is the solution was how we might be able to use Hull to surface customer behavioral metrics that could help build an automated lead scoring model to like effectively surface high quality leads. So that was kind of the challenge for us. And over the next couple of slides, I'll talk through like exactly how we used Hull to kind of achieve this. So the kind of the strategy that we took is that we wanted to come up with some metrics and attributes that we could use to kind of score customers based on their behavior and also their kind of like general fit. So the first thing we did is we looked at like the kind of classic demographics, and we used the Clearbit connector in Hull to find things like firmographic and demographic data, so things like company size, job title, those kind of traditional metrics. However, like we kind of started to identify early on that there's multiple personas, and like one size doesn't really fit all, which I think we've kind of like touched on kind of earlier already, that those traditional roles of decision maker don't necessarily fit that well anymore. Like different people are actually discovering and getting started with your products, and they may not necessarily even be the same people that are actually making the ultimate decisions. So like identifying fit based on firmographic and demographic data only gets you so far, and that's where we really want to start detecting kind of a more interest-based piece using the customer behavior data. So that's when we started to link up our Pusher global data warehouse and then start looking at really interesting behavioral data points such as web activity, upgrade frequency, the number of collaborators that users had in their account, adoption of features, and things like whether or not customers were hitting their plan limits. So the way that this kind of works for us is that our Pusher global system generates events when things happen, and these get forwarded into Segment. Segment then processes and forwards the events into the user record in Hull, and then we use the Clearbit connector to get the firmographic and demographic data, and then finally we use the Hull processor to pick out to transform the events into attributes, and this is kind of like where we actually get the customer behavior data from. So we're like transforming events into attributes that are kind of like customer behavior led metrics. This is then synced up to our HubSpot CRM platform, at which point we compute a lead score. Leads with high enough scores are routed automatically to our customer success team, and they will then start to engage with leads that have like attained a high enough score.
So I think one of the key parts here that we were talking about is that you need to kind of fit the data into what makes sense for your business. So Hull gives you a lot of flexibility in taking that data in and kind of computing interesting attributes based off of what makes sense for your business. So we give you the ability to kind of edit this data in real time. In some cases you got to cleanse it. Sometimes you got to reformat. And certainly for custom scoring, if you want to come up with sort of a scoring mechanism for lead qualification, that's something that a lot of the time, well, I mean, all the time, you're going to know best. So we try to give a lot of flexibility to our customers to kind of get to where they need to get to. So I think we, yeah, I think the whole processor is somewhat of an ETL feature. I think it's probably the T in the ETL. But I think so. I think we'll talk about a few examples here. How Pusher was able to transform some of its data. Chris, are you still there?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, sorry,
okay,
Tim.
Yeah.
Dive in there.
Okay, yeah.
So kind of one of the events like to walk through here, and this is one of the things we're doing with the whole processor, is when a customer changes their plan, Pusher Global emits a plan change event, and then we process this event and we work out a number of different metrics from this one event. So the first thing we do is we calculate a plan rank, and this basically just corresponds to the size of the plan that the customer's gone on to. And then we can like basically use the plan rank to calculate a ranking change. So we can work out like the plan the customer was on, the customer the plan they've gone to, and then work at a ranking change. So for example, if a customer upgraded by 2 plans, that would be a ranking change of 2. We can then work out the number of plan changes that a customer has had over the last week or the last month or the last year. And then also we can work out the cumulative rank that the customer has attained over that time period as well. So using that information, we can actually identify customers that are both frequently upgrading, and we can also work at customers that are completing like large upgrades at once. And we can kind of look at both as well. So we can kind of like take both of those attributes and say like, this customer is a really high growing customer. This customer has just really like gone from a really small plan to a really large plan and 1 step change. And then in turn, that increases their lead score. So we can start to reach out to these customers that have become like really hot leads because of that behavior, that kind of plan ranking behavior. And that's just like one of many events that we're processing to kind of generate some customer behavior data. So before we kind of implemented this, we basically had a lot of leads that were kind of like with no real intelligence behind them. It's just a long list of leads. So people that signed up, we were looking at them manually, trying to pick out like interesting points for those customers. Like, you know, did they have like an interesting email address, or are we seeing some usage on the account that's kind of relevant? So, but there was too many of them to really actually have an effective strategy around this. So by implementing this new system with Hull, it's made our lead qualification so much simpler. We can focus in on leads that we're targeting with an actual model. We're basically saying like customers that fit this profile surface up to our customer success team. So our customer success team isn't sifting through a large list anymore. The list is already kind of pre-sorted for them by automation. And that means we can really personalize the outreach that we're actually sending to customers, because we're spending less time looking at leads and more time kind of reviewing interesting leads and engaging those as quickly as we can.
Okay, I guess I'll just recap and then we can answer a couple of those questions that were just coming in. So I think just to recap that, the growth and acquisition section, it's, figuring out how you can take all the traditional data points, the firmographics, the demographics, and marry it with the behavioral data to develop a really good scoring model to determine interest is sort of the strategy, and then the results were much more focused targeting, much more personalized outreach, and ultimately better response rates and better conversion.
And Chris, I'm curious, like, how did you operationalize this data? Because there's obviously like identifying the fit, which was the first part you're mentioning. Then there was like detecting interest. That was stage 2. But what was stage 3? And like, how do you make use of all this good data?
Yeah, thanks, Wes. That's a good question. So that's where the HubSpot lead scoring comes in. Once the attributes, those customer behavior attributes have actually been calculated, we synchronize them to HubSpot, and then HubSpot has like a lead scoring mechanism where you can basically just like, do a lot of if else around, like if customer does this, give them a score of N, things like that. So we work through that, and like the more attributes that customers hit, or the more behaviors that customers show, the higher lead score is. And at that point, we have some routing that like routes those leads to our customer success team. And there's kind of like 2 phases to that as well. So like a certain score will read as kind of like an MQL, kind of like a marketing qualified lead, and like a customer success team will kind of give them outreach to help them kind of grow their plans to succeed as they get started. And then customers that have really hit like high plans will get routed to our kind of more like traditional sales teams, so like maybe start like higher plan kind of discussions.
Okay. And I've seen like 2 theories around like when it comes to scoring product usage data and like how to best do it. There's like one camp that's basically like, okay, if we use like, let's say a product qualified lead metric, once someone does X in the product, they become the product qualified lead. And I think it's like simple to view it that way. But then there's the other camp, which is like, it's always an ongoing thing. They're always going to have like some sort of score out of like, let's say 100. And like, as it progresses, like it's going to get higher and higher. So there's really just 2 different ways you could go about it. What have you found is best for how you structured it and really prioritized who you reach out to? Because like you mentioned, there's a ton of free users that you're sifting through all the time. but how do you decide who to go after?
Yeah, so the lead score is kind of like dynamically computed, so it kind of like changes over time. So as customers like do more things, like their lead score goes up. So we tend to prioritize people once they've reached like a certain score, and the higher the score, the more likely we are to reach out to them sooner. But essentially, we kind of like gate users by like a minimum score before we start to engage them. Otherwise, we kind of typically leave them to kind of like self-serve, and then like hopefully they will get the score that's high enough for us to actually engage with them. And that's generating enough leads like through our automated mechanism for our customer teams to have enough leads to kind of engage with without being like overloaded in the previous system where it was just kind of like, here's a long list, like try your best to pick out interesting customers.
Got it. Marilyn just had a question on this topic, or sorry, Alexandra. Like, what is the percentage of scored leads you send to your sales team? Yeah,
so I would say that from like the number of signups, we probably are sending around, the percentage isn't high. I'd say it's like less than 10% of our leads are actually getting routed to our sales team. And then from there, we're probably engaging and getting responses from about 10% of those. So the hit rate isn't necessarily like very high, but like we are getting responses back that are actually like of quality, whereas like just sending out like marketing automation doesn't necessarily get you relevant responses.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Did we cover Manas's question? I don't think so. I'll just say it out loud. What have you done to correlate these data points to different conversion stages, i.e. users who take X product action are Y times more likely to convert to an SAL, qualified op, etc.?
Yeah, so I think again that kind of like leads back to the way that we kind of use a minimum gating score to kind of move people into different stages, and then people with exceptionally high scores will actually move into like a different tier of our sales flow. So people with kind of like just kind of qualified based on a high enough score will go to one team, and then people with higher scores or kind of like other really hot indicators would go to like another team as well to handle those kind of like hotter sales.
And I think you kind of covered this, but Irina had a question to clarify what went into HubSpot, the most promising leads for more personalized follow-ups.
Yeah, so all of our leads actually go into HubSpot. It's just that they're not necessarily surfaced to our sales team until they become like promising leads, essentially.
Cool. I think maybe we will move on. You have any other questions? Oh wait, we got one more. It's more stack ranking the leads based on qualified activity, yeah? Shannon.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good summary. Yeah, so I guess like the higher leads, the kind of more interesting they are to our customer success teams.
Yeah, so just to kind of introduce the next section, I think this is, it ties back to the growth and acquisition in Pusher's case, which I find extremely interesting. But the ways that you can use this data to retain customers and to potentially push them into higher plans and upsell. I was actually really interested in this because I think a lot of this data really ties. Maybe is traditionally tied into customer success a little bit more, but being able to use customer success to upsell and to find people who are ready to upsell, I thought was a pretty interesting part of Chris's story.
So once we kind of like come up like start adding customer behavior metrics into Hull, we want to start like doing more with these. So the strategy we wanted to try out here was basically a low hanging fruit kind of email campaign designed to upgrade customers that are reaching their plan limits. And I'll kind of like discuss exactly like what that looks like and how we achieve that using Hull. So when a customer hits their plan limits, Pusher Global emits an event, which again goes through Segment, and that gets synchronized up to Hull. And then what we did is we used whole segmentation to identify users that had hit their plan limits a certain number of times within the last 30 days without actually upgrading. And once we've built that segment, we then synchronized that over to Customer IO and generated a marketing campaign to email those customers with incentives to actually upgrade to the next plan. And that was really easy to do using whole segmentation, which I think Tim's going to give a bit of an overview next.
Yeah, so sort of the first step in your use of Hull is always, bringing the data into one place to gain all of that transparency. But the very next thing is obviously like, what can I do with this data? What are the insights I can glean? So one of our most popular features is the ability to build segments based on accounts and not just attributes, but also behavioral data too. So it's really bringing those, firmographic, demographic traits together with what they're actually doing. And what we do is we actually we calculate this in real time. So the second somebody has those attributes and then also does something, we're able to classify you in a very specific segment and then drive behavior in real time. Whether that's put you into a Customer IO campaign or Slack notification or notification to the CS team. What we're really allowing you to do is see all of the data points from all of your different systems and then drive behavior.
So this is the segment that we actually built in Hull. So it's really simple. It's basically customers that haven't changed their plan in the last 30 days but have hit either their connections or messages hard limit, which is how we kind of gate our plans in the last at least three times in the last 30 days. And customers that then fell into the segment, we sent emails and basically said like, here's a coupon to upgrade. And this was really simple to set up. I mean, this took minutes to create the segment, and then to then generate a campaign. Customer IO was pretty low effort as well. So this was a really low effort outreach attempt. And I think one takeaway here is that the barriers to experimentation are really low with the whole segmentation engine, because you can just create segments for whatever your kind of like mind desires. If you've got the data for it, you can really start to segment users on a really granular level, and it's really easy to do as well. So in terms of our kind of future outlook for customer behavior data, we really want to use like product stickiness and kind of feature adoption with awareness messaging. So as an example, if a customer is or isn't using a certain feature, we want to provide them with resources to either adopt that feature or get started with that feature and help them kind of utilize that feature, especially things like sticky features. So like a good example of a sticky feature for us is like we have outgoing webhooks, and we know if customers are like implementing an outgoing or a webhook endpoint, they're becoming more tightly integrated with our services. So we know it's a sticky feature. They've had to like actually do something at their end. They've had to build something to capture those webhooks. So they've had to integrate with our service more than like some other features. So we really want to increase adoption of those kind of features. And we can basically like use customer behavioral data to say the customer has or hasn't turned on webhooks, and then drive appropriate messaging to try and encourage them to either adopt that feature or actually get started with that feature if they have turned those webhooks on, and make sure that they do succeed with them.
Cool. So just to kind of recap that section on retention and upsell. So figuring out how to generate that incremental revenue through upsell by using the customer success team to reach out, I think was, and being able to experiment really easily with different tactics there was the high level. And then, sort of the low-hanging fruit was sort of email personalization campaigns for these sort of, upsell retention opportunities. I thought it was really interesting that Chris used personalized email outreach for customer retention. A lot of our customers use it, obviously for outbounding, and I think there was a question here about the use of Customer IO versus some other versus HubSpot, and I thought it was pretty interesting how using personalized email can be a really awesome retention tool as well, and able to sort of a retention tool at scale as well.
And just to answer the question on why we use Customer IO, like it's just a better fit for our use case than the kind of like HubSpot marketing tools. It just works better for like what we actually need it for.
Cool. So just I think a couple last things, and then we'll open it up for questions. I think we're really excited to be connecting to more warehouses. I think actually I was talking with Chris earlier about connecting to a different warehouse of theirs. I think the way that the market is moving with the rise of Snowflake and BigQuery, we're going to see more and more of this data in warehouses like these. I think it's interesting the kind of features that BigQuery is layering on top of the warehouse as well. Things like, putting customer behavior data there, and then, using machine learning techniques to derive certain attributes, and then, using that data to send back to Hull to activate it. So I think we're pretty excited about, doing more deeper connections with more of the warehouses. Stop by our website and check us out if you are interested.
All right, thanks guys. I think that concludes kind of the presentation segment. So if there's any questions you guys have, feel free to throw that in the chat. We can take some now. We've got about 10 minutes to the top of the hour before we end. Yeah, send them in.
All right.
No problem, Shannon. We need some like waiting music for this time right now. I see people typing.
Yeah. Preparing myself for the hard-hitting questions.
Oh, looks like we got one. Alexander? What is your current stack, Chris, to process this behavior data?
Yeah, so as I said, like, we're basically generating events from our kind of internal Pusher Global system. And once those events have actually been put into Hull, that's where we're using the Hull process to actually process those events and work out like metrics, like customer behavior metrics in Hull. So that's kind of where like actually a lot of the customer behavior data actually comes from. It's the event processor in Hull, and then also some segmentation within Hull as well, which kind of we can start bucketing users by certain attributes.
Hey Shannon, that's a good question. I think I think there's probably a couple follow-up questions on what type of business you have, because if you're running, if you have sort of a freemium tier that you're trying to move people up into the paid plans, I think it makes a lot of sense to Hull has a tracker that you could just put into Google Tag Manager or just throw on your page, and immediately you start seeing all of these page clicks. That could be one way. Another way, like I was saying before, if your engineers are already storing this data somewhere, that could be even easier, and that's nice because you get all of the historical information as well. If you just put a tracker on your website, you see the behavior going forward. But if you've already got a database or a warehouse that's really rich with this behavioral data, I think that's a pretty good place to start, because you could start using it immediately, and you don't have to wait to have that data, behavioral data, going forward.
I would just add to that as well. I think with behavioral data, it kind of depends on like what's important to you as well. Like different kind of customers are going to have different metrics that are important, or different businesses are going to have different metrics that are important. So it'd be kind of a good idea to review what you think is going to be like identifies a successful customer, and focus on getting behavioral data that really relates to those success criteria.
We've got a question. So are you doing the lead source or the lead score calculation directly from Hull or from your data warehouse?
So the lead score calculation is actually done in HubSpot. So they've actually got a lead score calculation system that we actually make use of. So we just get the metrics from Hull. These are synchronized to HubSpot, and then we use the HubSpot lead scoring calculation to actually generate lead score.
Marilyn's asking, for Chris, pumping all these product leads into HubSpot can be pricey. I guess with your PLG model, you manage to be efficient where this isn't an issue.
That's a good point. We don't tend to stop leads that actually go into HubSpot at the moment, but potentially in future we could start to reduce the users that we're synchronizing up to HubSpot. I think it's because I guess Hull came first, or our HubSpot came before our customer behavioral models. We've always just synced up all the users, but maybe we could start to think about kind of actually not syncing up all the users to HubSpot if their lead score is too low. So that's a good point.
Marilyn, I also want to share that some of our customers actually use us because they have found that kind of syncing every single lead or every single event can be really pricey and expensive. But what they're using us for is actually kind of the selective synchronization. So everything gets stored in Hull, but then you can only you can create segments that only sync to Salesforce or only sync to HubSpot, so that you have more of a fine-grained control on who gets synced, and they're able to save a lot of money that way.
It's worth knowing we do that with some of our connectors. So like, for example, with Clearbit, we don't send all of our users to Clearbit as an example to be enriched. Like, they have to meet certain qualification factors before we actually do that. So Hull is really powerful for like allowing you to kind of control what users go to like what other connectors, and maybe that's something we can invest more time in, like with HubSpot as an example.
Oh, that's a huge question. I could talk about that for an hour. I think, knowing what your customers are doing at any point in time is pretty valuable. I mean, certainly, there's a level at which you have to determine what is valuable for your business. Maybe I'll give an example. I'll give two examples, maybe. One where it is applicable and one where it is not applicable. So, if you're a product that you sort of turn on and then walk away from, and you only come back to it when things are breaking, maybe your customer behavior data, it maybe isn't as important as, what's actually going on as the product is processing something. But if you're something that, I think in many cases, if you want to give a good experience to your customers, just square one, your whole product team is going to be inside of, Amplitude or wherever else, looking at what people are doing. And then if you have any sort of, triggers for what leads may be better than others, and and even upselling or determining if somebody's being successful or not. I'm sorry, I'm rambling here a little bit, but I think there's so many places that it can be used. I'm actually surprised by our customers every day on where they're using it. My life is spent in the data, bringing the data in, looking at it, and pushing it back out. But the ways that you can actually use the data, I think our customers are finding really cool, innovative ways to use this data every single day.
I'll add in on there as well. I think for us, we are going to keep looking at adding more behavioral data. Like, one thing, the lead score model is something we've really only implemented a couple of months ago. So it's kind of version 1 of the model, and models have to evolve. We have to see what's effective, what's not effective, review what's actually generating like success from the leads that we're actually surfacing, and then add more behavioral data to kind of like tune that model as we go on. So it's only been in place for a couple of months, so we're going to review, look at what's working, look at what's not, and look at whether or not we can actually add in more metrics for success.
Yeah, Wes, what's your opinion on the future of customer behavioral data and how it affects ProductLed?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is it just has to be operationalized more. And like, whenever I hear sales teams talk about this whole product-led movement, like, a lot of them can get a bit worried because it's like, okay, the product's gonna sell itself. But no, actually sales becomes some of the biggest advocates once you start helping them understand the data and making it useful to them. And so like there's one metric I feel like is going to be a lot more common. It's the product qualified lead metric. And like what it really is just like, how do you measure success of your users and how are you measuring that? And like one of the best ways of using this metric is really just how can you rally everyone on your team, not just from the marketing team, but product team, sales team, support team, around just creating successful users. That's really, when I look at what is the secret of the most successful product-led businesses, is really that they believe that end user success will eventually become your success. And so it's really just about leading with that value first. And if you're not measuring it, you're missing out on a huge potential if you're not really operationalizing it and using that data across all teams.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's that operationalizing, activating it. That's the powerful part.
Yeah, because I think like maybe the first stage of like good data was like, let's just get our hands on data. But like it's 2020. We've got that. We've got more data than we can ever hold. But it's just about how do we use that? How do we make it actionable? And I think what we've covered today is definitely making sure that if you're having that data, use it.
That's a great point.
I also think it's worth kind of adding to that as well that, you know, the small accounts that like this customer behavioral data is really targeting the customers we want to succeed. They're the top of the funnel, like, and we're just trying to basically grow out the top of that funnel more and actually making sure that people progress on their customer journey. We're trying to say like these customers look like they may actually succeed with our products, and we're trying to make sure that they do. So the customers are at that kind of like stage in the funnel that are, you know, potentially years time, your target accounts, your big accounts are actually going to go to your like maybe more traditional sales reps. It's about making sure that you're starting to, you know, really drive that top of the funnel, making sure that people that are coming in, signing up for your free offering are actually converting into your small paid plans, and then growing through that, growing up to your bigger paid plans. And then finally they're like, right, we need to start talking about really big plans. We need to start engaging with our sales team. You know, what can you do for us at this much higher level than we were 12 months ago?
Definitely.
All right, guys. As usual, our webinar went over time, but we had a lot of awesome stuff to cover. So thanks everyone for jumping on and tuning in. And I really appreciate our speakers, Chris, Wes, and Tim, for sharing your time and expertise with everyone. I'm going to go and get the recording and the slides out to y'all as soon as possible. And if you have any final questions, hit us up at hull.io. I can be the kind of air traffic controller of all questions. If you got anything for Wes and for Chris, I can send that over. But yeah, thank you guys all, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Daddy, when did we leave?